Yo, what's up? Dr. Swole here, MD, pro physique athlete. Today we're going to be sharing a full 3-day hypertrophy program based on the full body split that is dumbbell only. I've been asked to do another dumbbell only program for people who don't have access to a lot of equipment. And this is going to be particularly useful for those training at home or in limited gyms. This program is designed for a beginner athlete or someone who does well with low volumes. I'll start with a program walkthrough where I'll share everything you'll need to know to run the program yourself, including exercises, sets, and reps. Then we'll talk about the weekly layout or how to spread out your workouts across the week. And finally, we'll talk about the pros and cons of this dumbbell-only, full-body, 3-day hypertrophy program. Alright, let's do our program walkthrough. So this is Dr. Swole's dumbbell-only 3-day full-body program. It's a low-volume program designed for beginners. And it is set up as day 1, day 2, and day 3. Here are the exercises, and there are the sets and reps. Down here we have the total number of sets for each workout, so you have an idea of workout length. And down here we have the total number of sets for each week for each muscle group. Let's get into it. Starting off with day 1, we kick it off with Bulgarian split squats for the quads. 3 sets of 8 to 12. I also count these for the glutes and hamstrings. They are probably one of the best options for leg training if you only have access to dumbbells. Leg training is going to be relatively limited since you can't overload really heavy with dumbbells. So you'll see that we lean a lot on unilateral work here. When you cut down to one leg, you're able to overload that single leg a lot more using less weight. I actually consider these the main leg movement of the program. Next, we have single leg Romanian deadlifts for the glutes and hamstrings, 3 sets of 10 to 15. If you're able to get a good workout with traditional dumbbell RDLs, then go for that. But if you are too strong for your dumbbells, a single leg RDL will allow you to continue to overload even if you don't have access to really heavy weights. Then we have dumbbell bench press for the chest, 3 sets of 6 to 10. And obviously you can just basically add dumbbell in front of all of these movements. As we said, it's a dumbbell only program, so I've omitted the word dumbbell in front of everything. Then we have dumbbell bent over rows for the back, 4 sets of 6 to 10. Dumbbell hammer curls for the biceps, 3 sets of 6 to 10. And then dumbbell skull crushers for the triceps, 3 sets of 6 to 10. Following that, we have dumbbell lateral raises for the side delts, 4 sets of 8 to 12. And finally, dumbbell standing calf raises for the calves, 3 sets of 8 to 12. And we're doing these single-legged. Now note that with this full body setup, it's really easy to superset things. You probably don't want to superset these because there is some overlap, but dumbbell bench press and bent over rows work well. Hammer curls and skull crushers also superset really well. You can even superset your lateral raises and standing calf raises since you're not using the same muscles. This is something a lot of people don't realize, that you can superset upper body and lower body movements to save time. And supersetting is going to be particularly easy if you're training at home since you're the king of the gym and you can hog all of the equipment. Then we have day 2. We start off with lunges for the glutes and hamstrings as well as the quads, 3 sets of 8 to 12. If you don't have a lot of space, you can do a reverse lunge here. Then we have goblet squats for the quads, 3 sets of 8 to 20. If you have trouble overloading your goblet squats because you don't have heavy enough dumbbells, what you can do is you can actually superset these 2 movements. So do a set of lunges followed immediately by goblet squats. This will allow you to start off your goblet squats closer to failure, so you'll get a good workout even using less weight. This is essentially a form of pre-exhaustion, and it is somewhat of a more advanced technique, typically used by more advanced people, but it can also be useful in this kind of setting if you don't have access to heavy weights. Then we have the dumbbell overhead press, which mainly trains the anterior delts, but also hits a bit of upper pec and triceps, 3 sets of 6 to 10. After that, dumbbell floor presses for the chest and triceps, 3 sets of 10 to 15. Floor presses are a great example of how you can really change up an exercise even if you have the same implements by changing up the range of motion. Since we're only focusing on the end range of motion with floor presses, we're putting a lot more emphasis on the triceps. After that, dumbbell pullovers to the back, 4 sets of 10 to 15. Then we have seated bicep curls for the biceps, 3 sets of 8 to 12. Dumbbell upright rows for the side delts, 4 sets of 8 to 12. And finally, some ab work. So you're going to do 3 sets of a tricep. And a tricep is basically where you string together 3 exercises and perform them back to back with minimal rest. Try to choose at least one exercise that you can add resistance to and progressively overload, like weighted crunches. Then we have day 3. We start with dumbbell leg extensions for the quads, 3 sets of 12 to 20. People don't realize this, but you can do some leg extension and leg curling work with dumbbells by putting them between your ankles. For these, I'd actually recommend lying flat on your back on the bench to give your quads more of a stretch. Then we have dumbbell leg curls for the hamstrings, 3 sets of 12 to 20. You're gonna have to play around with your bench and the equipment you have to find what's comfortable for you. I'll also note that once you start getting creative with these dumbbell variations at home, these can often be difficult to pull off well. So they actually aren't my favorite. So if you try them out and you don't like them that much, I'd recommend just repeating this day 1 with the Bulgarian split squats and single leg RDLs. These are going to be good bets for getting a good stimulus with some overload potential. Then we have incline dumbbell bench press for the chest, 3 sets of 8 to 12. Single arm dumbbell rows for the back, 4 sets of 8 to 12. Note that if you are getting too strong for your dumbbells on these exercises that I've listed here, you can always continue the challenge by upping the reps. So just because I said 8 to 12 doesn't mean you can't even go higher like 12 to 20 or even 20 to 30. This will allow you to continue to work around limited equipment. Then we have incline bicep curls for the biceps, 3 sets of 8 to 12. Incline dumbbell skull crushers for the triceps, 3 sets of 8 to 12. And then we have side lying lateral raises for the side delts, 4 sets of 10 to 15. And to do these, try setting the bench at about a 60-degree angle, and you're doing a single arm lateral raise. This allows you to put more emphasis on the bottom range of the movement, which challenges your muscle when it's in a more stretched position. Finally, again, we have standing single leg dumbbell calf raises for the calves, 3 sets of 10 to 15. You'll notice that we're still able to basically hit all types of exercises even with just dumbbells. Keep in mind that you can take my ideas for exercise selection and apply them to other splits if necessary. Dumbbell-only training can be difficult to program sometimes because it can be difficult to really overload properly. Okay, now that you've seen the program, let's talk about the weekly layout. So this is pretty simple. In a full body split, you just want to spread out the days as evenly as possible throughout the week. That is, you want to try and have a rest day in between each workout. Note that since this full body split is so flexible, if you wanted to, you could run this on a 1 day on, 1 day off fashion. So you could start again with day 1 on the Sunday here. Note that this is a very flexible split since you are able to shift around days. For example, this day 3 could move over here, or if we were talking about the next week, for example, we could take the next week's day 1 and put it on Sunday here. Now, if you do have an irregular schedule and you need to do so, it is possible to put days back to back. This wouldn't be optimal because obviously your muscles would still be fatigued, but you can get around this with intelligent auto-regulation. That is, you can modulate the intensity of this day so that you are able to train again the next day. If you are training 3 days per week, full body is my favorite split because it allows you to get that at least twice per week frequency for each muscle group, which is what I recommend. Okay, now let's talk about the pros and cons of this dumbbell-only 3-day full body program. Starting off with the pros, the full body split is highly customizable, and that's one of my favorite aspects of it. Since you have the opportunity to put every muscle group on each day, you can really tweak the amount of volume and even frequency for each muscle group. For example, to add volume, you just increase the number of sets for each exercise for a muscle group, and you can also change the frequency by deleting certain muscle groups from certain days. For example, in this program, I removed calf training from day 2 and replaced it with some abs. If you wanted, you could even shift sets around so certain days are more muscle group heavy, and you could also change the order of the exercises if needed to prioritize certain muscle groups. So if there's a certain muscle group that's lagging for you and you really want to prioritize it, say back, you'd put that exercise first for each day. This movement will get prioritized since you'll be more fresh and you'll be able to move more weight for more reps. In other preset splits, you don't have as much ability to tweak the amount of specialization for each muscle group. And for most of those splits, the prioritization will be baked into the split itself. For example, if you run a traditional upper-lower split for 4 days per week, the lower body naturally gets specialized because you have more muscle groups to train in your upper body. Thus, it's harder for you to fit in enough volume for your upper body on those upper body days. Next advantage of this program, this comes from the dumbbell-only nature of it, is that you have lower fatigue movements. This is somewhat unique to this program since we're constrained to our dumbbells here and we don't have access to really heavy weights like with barbells. Since we're not working with such heavy weights, this actually generates less fatigue. For example, a Bulgarian split squat generates a lot less fatigue than a heavy barbell squat. Since you're not lifting as much weight, you don't generate as much fatigue from axial loading. Axial loading is the compressive forces put on your spine when you put heavy weights in your back like with squats or when you lift something really heavy off the ground like with deadlifts. This is one of the big powers of unilateral leg training. And it's actually something I did deliberately when I was in contest prep for Worlds last year. Since I was dealing with so much fatigue, I didn't want to deal with heavy squats and deadlifts, so I did a lot of unilateral leg work. So keep this in mind as a tool in your toolkit if you are dealing with a lot of fatigue, and it can be useful for more advanced people. Next, this program generates a high frequency of up to 3 times per week for a lot of muscle groups. This can be nice because it gives you the ability to tweak volumes, and you end up being fresh for each workout, which is great for fatigue distribution. I didn't put this specifically on the list, but fatigue distribution is basically how you spread out your training stress throughout the week, which is optimized in a full body split. So that's another advantage of the full body split. You don't have a single tough leg day, for example. I don't call that much attention to it here because I'm presuming you're less advanced, like beginner to intermediate, so fatigue isn't as big of an issue. Final advantage here is that this program is very flexible. In a 3-day full body split, you do have quite a bit of power to move around workouts. If you're training 5 or 6 days per week, you have a lot more constraint. Okay, now let's talk about the cons of this 3-day hypertrophy program using only dumbbells. First of all, and probably the main issue, is that you have difficulty with overload. Obviously, it is possible to get really heavy dumbbells, but for the most part, your strength is going to outstrip the dumbbells that you have at home. This presents a problem particularly for leg and back training, since these big muscle groups can get really strong and eventually you will need heavier weights. Now, I have tried to get around this by choosing exercises that will deal with lighter weights. For example, unilateral leg work like Bulgarian split squats and lunges. We're also assuming that you are less advanced here so that you should still be able to get a challenge. But eventually you are going to get too strong for your dumbbells and you will have to either try and find tougher variations or move on to higher rep work. Note that I have also shown some strategies here for dealing with lighter weights, for example, supersetting exercises of the same muscle group. We did this in the example of the lunge and goblet squat superset. By stacking two exercises together that both involve the quads, by the time you get to the second one, you will be fatigued even though you're using lighter weights. Note that this still isn't necessarily the same stimulus you would get if you were using heavy weights with more rest, but it does give us the option of keeping in a squat type movement even though we don't have access to a heavy barbell. So the idea for this pre-exhaust superset is you put the weaker exercise first and the stronger exercise second. In the weaker exercise, you're still going to be challenged using light weights, and by the time you get to the second exercise, you're fatigued with minimal rest in between, so you will still be challenged. Next disadvantage here is when you're using only dumbbells, you have less control over your strength curves. When we're talking about dumbbells, it's basically the dumbbell versus gravity. So for example, in a dumbbell bicep curl, the exercise is hardest at 90 degrees, where the force vector is pointed straight down. This can present some programming difficulty because you don't have as much control over your ability to challenge all ranges of motion. Note that we still can access the other ranges of motion by changing our angle of the body in the case of curls. So for example, here we use incline curls to challenge that stretched range of motion. So you'll see that I've still found ways to try and at least include one stretch type exercise for each muscle group. Next, with full body training, some people find that they get less of a pump, and this is just because you're doing fewer sets for each muscle group in any given workout. This is something that's a personal preference. So if you really like pumping a lot of blood into your muscle by doing lots of sets, then it is something that you could try, but don't feel forced to train this way if you really hate it. Finally, with a 3-day full body split, you are getting into higher frequency territory, so some people might find they get overlapping soreness in between workouts. The ultimate answer to this is to learn how to auto-regulate. That is, you want to train to an RIR and you want to control your RIR, or repetitions in reserve, so that you're not getting too sore. This is a relatively low volume program though, so I don't anticipate it to be that much of a problem. Also note that I put an asterisk here because I have tried to address this by shifting around some of the exercise types so that we don't always have two tough exercises back to back. For example, for our chest training, I put our tougher dumbbell press and incline dumbbell press on Monday and Friday, with a floor press, which is your easier pressing movement, on the Wednesday in between. This serves as a little buffer in between your tougher exercises. So I did put some thought into this in programming it for Monday, Wednesday, Friday. As I said, you still can shift days around a little bit if you are constrained by your schedule. Now, I will be sharing this full program as an Excel file in my Facebook group. So if you haven't joined the group already, find the link in the description below. Join the group and you can download the program for free. If you want to see another example of a dumbbell-only program, check out this video where I share a 4-day upper-lower split that again uses only dumbbells. Regardless of what split you're following, it's going to be really useful to see these kinds of programs if you only have access to dumbbells, because you need that inspiration for exercise selection. That is, you really want to get over that first issue of having difficulty with overload, and that comes down to exercise selection. If you want to blow up your gains, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time.